Poor girl walks into a restaurant, asks to trade her easy bake oven for food. A millionaire sees everything. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The gentle clink of fine crystal and the hushed murmur of important conversations filled the air at Bellevue, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Jackson Prescott adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a 45th birthday gift to himself, and glanced at his watch. Thursday evening, 7:30 p.m. Like clockwork, as it had been for the past 5 years. The maitre d' had seated him at his usual table, the one in the corner with the view of both the entrance and the glittering city skyline. Privacy, control, and a vantage point. Everything Jackson valued in both dining and business. "Your usual Bordeaux, Mr. Prescott?" asked Sebastian, the sommelier who had served him for years. "Yes," Jackson replied without looking up from his tablet. The quarterly reports showed another record-breaking profit margin. Prescott Enterprises had just acquired its third pharmaceutical company this year. The board would be pleased. His shareholders would be ecstatic. Yet as Sebastian poured the deep red liquid into his glass, Jackson felt nothing. Not pride, not satisfaction, certainly not joy. Just the empty acknowledgement that this was how success was supposed to look. He raised the wine to his lips when the restaurant's heavy oak doors swung open. Jackson wouldn't have noticed. People came and went all evening, except for the sudden shift in atmosphere. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A small figure stood in the doorway, hesitant and visibly out of place. A little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, clutching something yellow to her chest. Her blonde hair was neatly combed, but her clothes, a faded blue dress and worn sneakers, clearly marked her as someone who didn't belong in Bellevue's rarefied air. Jackson watched with detached curiosity as Marcus, the restaurant manager, approached the child. The girl's expression was serious, determined despite her obvious nervousness. She looked around at the elegant tables, the crystal chandeliers, the wealthy patrons in their evening wear, and swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, young lady," Marcus said, his voice professionally pleasant but firm. "We don't allow unaccompanied minors. Are your parents outside?" The girl shook her head. "No, sir." Her voice was small but clear. "I wanted to ask you something important." Marcus glanced around, clearly concerned about the disruption. "Perhaps outside would be better." "Please," the girl said, and now Jackson could see she was holding what appeared to be a toy oven. Its yellow plastic dulled with age and use. "It will only take a minute." Something in her voice made Jackson set down his tablet. Around him, the other diners were watching with expressions ranging from amusement to distaste. The girl lifted the toy oven slightly. "Could I trade this for, some food?" "It still works, I promise. My mom is sick and we couldn't pay our bills this month." Her voice wobbled slightly, but she stood straight, eyes fixed on Marcus's face. The manager's expression softened, but discomfort was evident in his posture. "I'm very sorry to hear that, but we don't. That is, we can't." "It's an easy bake oven," the girl continued earnestly. "You can make real cakes in it. It was a birthday present, but Mom needs food more than I need toys." Jackson found himself standing. The movement surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise his waiter, who nearly dropped the bread basket. "Marcus," he called, his voice carrying in the now quiet restaurant. "It's all right. The young lady can join me." He didn't recognize his own actions. In 15 years of dining at Bellevue, Jackson had never once invited a companion, let alone intervened in a situation that didn't concern him. Yet here he was, walking toward the small figure still clutching her yellow oven. Up close, he could see her eyes were a striking blue, intelligent and now wary as she assessed him. "My name is Jackson," he said, kneeling to meet her eye level. Another unprecedented action. "What's yours?" "Lily Bennett," she answered, her posture still guarded. "Are you sure it's okay?" "I don't want to bother anyone. I just thought someone might want this." She held up the toy oven again. "I'm sure. And while I don't need an easy bake oven, I would appreciate some company for dinner. Would that be acceptable?" A flicker of relief crossed her face, though suspicion remained. Smart girl, Jackson thought. Don't trust strangers too quickly, even ones in expensive suits. Can I take food home to my mom? She asked bluntly. She's too sick to come herself. Of course, Jackson said, standing and gesturing toward his table. We'll order extra. As they walked through the restaurant, Jackson felt the stares but found, oddly, that he didn't care. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was doing something unpredictable, something that wasn't calculated to maximize efficiency or profit. Once seated, Lily placed her oven carefully on the chair beside her. Jackson noticed a faded name written in marker on its side. Lily's Bakery. So, Lily, Jackson began, tell me about your mother. The girl's expression grew serious. Her name is Charlotte. She's a nurse at Mercy Hospital, but she got pneumonia 3 weeks ago. The medicine costs a lot, and since Dad died, it's just us. She said this matter-of-factly, without self-pity. I'm sorry about your father, Jackson said, genuinely. When did he pass away? 2 years ago. He was helping people, in an accident, and got hurt really bad. Lily looked down at her empty plate. Mom says he was a hero. He sounds like one, Jackson agreed. And your mother is a nurse? That's an important job, too. Lily nodded, pride momentarily replacing worry. She helps sick babies in the hospital. She's really good at it. Everyone says so. Jackson signaled to the waiter, who approached cautiously. We'll have the chef's special for 2, with an additional meal to go, and perhaps some ice cream for dessert. He raised an eyebrow at Lily, who gave her first real smile of the evening. Yes, please, she said, then added earnestly, but nothing too expensive. Something twisted in Jackson's chest, a sensation so unfamiliar he couldn't immediately identify it. This child, worried about money while surrounded by people who thought nothing of spending her mother's monthly rent on a single meal. Don't worry about that, he said gently. Consider it a trade for brightening my evening. As they ate, Lily's natural childhood exuberance gradually emerged. She told him about her school, her favorite subjects, science and art, and how she was learning to cook simple meals since her mother had gotten sick. The easy bake oven was practice, she explained, patting the toy. Mom got it for my birthday, last year. I made little cakes every Sunday. And now you're willing to give it up? Jackson observed. Lily shrugged, but he could see it wasn't as casual a sacrifice as she pretended. Mom's more important than cakes. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate souffle that made Lily's eyes widen, Jackson had made a decision that would alter the course of his carefully controlled life. Lily, he said, I'd like to help your mother with her medical bills, and perhaps with your groceries until she's well enough to return to work. The girl looked up sharply, suspicion returning. Why? You don't even know us. A fair question. Why indeed? Jackson himself wasn't entirely sure. Perhaps it was the girl's courage. Perhaps it was the mention of her father's sacrifice, or perhaps it was something in those determined blue eyes that reminded him of another child, long ago, who had faced the world's cold indifference with nothing but stubborn will. Let's just say I admire your bravery in coming here tonight, he answered. It can't have been easy. Lily considered this. Mom says we shouldn't take charity, she said finally. She says we have to stand on our own feet. This isn't charity, Jackson replied, surprised to find he meant it. Think of it as community, people helping each other through difficult times. He could see her weighing his words, her young mind grappling with adult concepts of pride versus necessity. Could you talk to my mom about it? She finally asked. She makes the big decisions. I'd be honored to speak with her, Jackson said. As they left the restaurant, Jackson carrying a carefully packaged meal for Charlotte, he felt the curious stares of the staff and other diners. For a man whose reputation was built on cold calculation and ruthless efficiency, this display of, what? Compassion? Connection? Whatever it was, it didn't fit the narrative of Jackson Prescott, the billionaire who had famously said in a Fortune magazine interview that sentiment has no place in business. or life. Yet as Lily clutched her worn Easy-Bake oven in one hand and the bag of food in the other, looking up at him with cautious hope, Jackson felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, something that had been dormant for decades. "My car is this way," he said, leading her to where his driver waited with the Bentley. "Let's go see your mother." Behind them, the exclusive world of Bellevue continued its evening of luxury and privilege. But Jackson Prescott was already moving toward something far more valuable than anything he had found there in 15 years of Thursday dinners. Jackson's Bentley glided through streets that grew progressively narrower and less maintained as they crossed into the east side of the city. Next to him, Lily sat with the container of food balanced carefully on her lap, her Easy-Bake oven secured by the seatbelt between them. "It's the blue building," she directed, pointing to a weathered apartment complex that had likely been built in the 1970s. "Third floor." As Jackson stepped out of the car, the contrast between his world and Lily's struck him forcefully. The sounds of sirens in the distance, the flickering streetlight, the graffiti on the adjacent building wall, all elements that never penetrated his carefully curated existence. "Stay here, James," he instructed his driver, who looked visibly uncomfortable with the neighborhood. Lily led him through a small lobby with mailboxes showing various states of disrepair. The elevator had an out-of-order sign, so they took the stairs, the girl climbing with practiced familiarity while Jackson followed, noticing the worn carpet and faded paint. "Mom might be sleeping," Lily whispered as they reached her door. "She gets really tired now." She turned a key attached to a faded ribbon around her neck and pushed the door open softly. "Mom, I brought dinner, and someone who wants to help us." The apartment was small but meticulously clean. What it lacked in space and modern amenities, it made up for in thoughtful touches. Hand-drawn pictures taped to the refrigerator, bookshelves overflowing with well-loved volumes, a collection of nursing awards displayed proudly on one wall. A thin woman with Lily's same striking blue eyes sat up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders. Despite her obvious illness, pale complexion, dark circles under her eyes, the slight wheeze in her breathing, Charlotte Bennett possessed a dignity that immediately commanded respect. "Lily, what have you done?" she asked, her voice hoarse, but clear. Her eyes fixed on Jackson with a mixture of confusion and wariness. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mrs. Bennett," Jackson began, suddenly feeling oddly nervous. "Your daughter visited Bellevue Restaurant tonight. She showed remarkable courage." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Lily, you were supposed to be at Mrs. Garcia's apartment." She turned to Jackson. "I'm so sorry if she bothered you, Mr. Prescott." Jackson Prescott. And she was no bother at all. Recognition flickered in Charlotte's eyes at his name, but she was more focused on her daughter. "Where did you get food from? Lily, please tell me you didn't." "I just asked if someone wanted to trade," Lily explained, setting the container on the coffee table. "For my Easy-Bake." And Mr. Prescott said he wanted to help instead. Charlotte's expression shifted from confusion to mortification. "Mr. Prescott, I can't accept—" "Please," Jackson interrupted. "At least accept the meal. Beyond that, we can discuss options that respect your independence while still addressing immediate concerns." Something in his tone, perhaps the absence of condescension, made Charlotte pause. She studied his face, looking for hidden motives. "Why would you help strangers?" she finally asked. It was the second time tonight he'd faced this question, and Jackson still wasn't entirely sure of the answer. But as he stood in this modest apartment, watching a clearly proud woman fighting both illness and poverty while her daughter tried to sell her beloved toy for food, he knew he couldn't walk away, "because your daughter reminded me that some things matter more than money," he said simply. "Now please eat while it's still warm. We can talk after." Charlotte nodded slowly, and Lily eagerly opened the container, releasing the aroma of gourmet food into the small apartment. As Jackson watched them, an unexpected memory surfaced. His mother, decades ago, trying to hide her cough as she worked double shifts to keep them afloat. He had been younger than Lily when pneumonia had finally taken her. leaving him alone in the world. Some patterns, it seemed, were not meant to repeat. A week later, Jackson stood outside the Bennett's apartment door, a bag of groceries in one hand and a folder of medical documents in the other. 3 visits in 7 days, unprecedented for a man whose personal connections typically lasted no longer than a business quarter. He knocked, hearing the now familiar patter of Lily's footsteps rushing to answer. "Mr. Prescott," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Mom's feeling better today. She sat up for breakfast." The simple achievement, stated with such joy, put Jackson's morning conference call, where they'd celebrated a $50 million acquisition, into sharp perspective. "That's excellent news," he said, following her inside. "And please call me Jackson." The apartment looked brighter today. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and Charlotte sat in an armchair rather than lying on the couch. Though still thin, some color had returned to her face. "You didn't need to bring groceries again," she said, though her tone held more gratitude than reproach. "The specialist you sent was more than enough." After their first meeting, Jackson had arranged for a top pulmonologist to visit Charlotte. The doctor had adjusted her medications and treatment plan, resulting in noticeable improvement. "It's no trouble," Jackson replied, setting down the bags. "Besides, Lily mentioned you like strawberries. These are from a farm upstate." The past week had transformed his routine entirely. Between meetings, he found himself researching pneumonia treatments or having his assistant find children's books about nursing to surprise Lily. His evening calls now included updates to Charlotte about hospital billing issues he'd resolved. "The hospital administrator called yesterday," Charlotte said, watching him unpack the groceries. "She said our bills have been taken care of through an anonymous donation." Jackson concentrated on arranging fruit in a bowl. "That's fortunate, Jackson." Charlotte's voice was gentle but firm. "Why are you doing all this?" He paused, a pint of strawberries in hand. The question deserved an honest answer, but the truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. "When I was 6, he began slowly, "my mother got sick, pneumonia like you. We had no insurance, no savings. She kept working through her illness because I needed to be fed." He set the strawberries down. "She died 3 weeks later." Charlotte's expression softened. "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago," Jackson said, though the memory felt suddenly fresh. "But when Lily walked into that restaurant, willing to give up something she loved for your care." He shook his head. Some patterns shouldn't repeat. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but rather filled with mutual understanding. "Mom, can I show Jackson my science project?" Lily called from her bedroom. "Of course, sweetheart," Charlotte answered, her eyes still on Jackson. As Lily proudly displayed her solar system model, Jackson found himself genuinely interested in her explanations of planetary orbits. When she mentioned struggling with her math homework since Charlotte had been ill, he offered to help. An hour later, he sat at their small kitchen table, patiently explaining fractions while Charlotte prepared tea with steady, if still weakened, hands. "You're good with her," Charlotte observed quietly as Lily concentrated on a problem. "She's easy to be good with," Jackson replied, surprised to find he meant it. Later, as he prepared to leave, Charlotte walked him to the door while Lily continued her homework. "The doctor says I should be able to return to work in 2 weeks," she said. "Part-time at first, but it's something." Jackson nodded, though an unexpected thought arose. He would miss these visits when they were no longer needed. "That's excellent progress," he said professionally, "but don't rush your recovery." Charlotte studied his face. "You know, most people would have just bought the girl dinner and forgotten about us by morning." Jackson smiled slightly. "I've been told I'm not most people." "No," she agreed, returning his smile. "You certainly aren't." As he drove away, Jackson realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Anticipation for something unrelated to business. He was looking forward to tomorrow's visit. "This is where you live?" Lily's eyes widened as Jackson's Bentley passed through the wrought iron gates of his estate. "It looks like a castle." Charlotte squeezed her daughter's hand, equally awed but more reserved. Lily, remember what we discussed about manners? It's quite all right, Jackson said, oddly self-conscious about his home's grandeur. And it's not really a castle, just a house that's too big for one person. 2 weeks had passed since their first meeting, and circumstances had changed rapidly. Charlotte's recovery had progressed, but her apartment building had suddenly become uninhabitable due to a major plumbing failure. With repairs estimated to take at least a month, Jackson had offered his guest house as a temporary solution. There's absolutely no obligation, he'd assured Charlotte when making the offer. It's sitting empty anyway. Now, as the car crunched along the circular driveway, he wondered if he'd overstepped. The Bennetts might feel overwhelmed or, worse, obligated by such surroundings. Eleanor, Jackson's longtime housekeeper, waited at the front entrance. Her normally impassive expression couldn't fully hide her surprise at the guests. In 15 years, Jackson had never invited anyone to stay. Eleanor, this is Charlotte Bennett and her daughter Lily. They'll be using the guest house for a while. Very good, sir, Eleanor replied, recovering quickly. I've prepared it as requested. Would you like me to show them the way? I'll do it, Jackson said, then noticed Charlotte's pallor. But perhaps we should rest a moment first? Inside, Lily stared openly at the soaring ceilings and artwork that cost more than most houses. Charlotte sat carefully on the edge of an antique sofa, looking simultaneously impressed and uncomfortable. Would you like some tea, Mrs. Bennett? Eleanor offered, picking up on her discomfort. Charlotte, please, and yes, that would be lovely. As Eleanor left, Jackson sat across from them, suddenly unsure how to be a host in his own home, a space that functioned more as a showcase than a living environment. Do you have a swimming pool? Lily asked, breaking the awkward silence. I do, Jackson admitted, though I rarely use it. Can I see it? Please? Charlotte began to protest, but Jackson shook his head. I'd be delighted to show you. Perhaps tomorrow when you're settled. Eleanor returned with tea and cookies, which Lily approached cautiously, until receiving her mother's nod of permission. These are really good, she declared after one bite. Eleanor's specialty, Jackson said. When I was recovering from surgery last year, she made them every day. You were sick too? Lily asked, cookie crumbs on her chin. Just a minor procedure, he clarified, catching Charlotte's curious glance. Nothing like your mother's situation. After tea, Jackson showed them to the guest house, a 3-bedroom structure that still managed to be larger than most apartments. As Lily raced to explore, Charlotte turned to him. This is too much, Jackson. We can't possibly. It's empty most of the year, he interrupted gently. Please consider it a practical solution, not an extravagance. She studied him with those perceptive blue eyes that seemed to see through his practiced exterior. Why do you have a house with so many empty rooms? The question was innocent, but cut straight to a truth Jackson rarely confronted. Why indeed? Status? Investment? Or perhaps the illusion that space could fill the emptiness he carried inside? I suppose I thought success should look a certain way, he answered, surprising himself with his honesty. Charlotte nodded, understanding more than he'd said aloud. Thank you for this. We'll try not to disrupt your routine. But as Jackson walked back to his main house, watching Eleanor already showing Lily the garden flowers, he realized that disruption might be exactly what his routine needed. The doorbell rang at precisely 10:30 a.m., interrupting the unexpected scene in Jackson's kitchen. Lily perched on a stool, explaining her science homework while Jackson made pancakes, a skill Eleanor had hurriedly taught him the previous evening. I'll get it, Eleanor said, eyeing the slightly lopsided pancake Jackson was attempting to flip. Moments later, she returned with a visitor. Mr. Prescott, this is Ms. Vivian Reeves. She says she's from social services. Jackson set down the spatula, instantly alert. Charlotte, who had been enjoying her coffee at the counter, straightened in her chair. The woman was professionally dressed, with a portfolio tucked under her arm and an expression that revealed nothing. Mr. Prescott, she began, I'm here regarding Lily Bennett. We received a report about her current living situation. Jackson glanced at Lily, who had gone very still. Perhaps we should speak privately, he suggested, gesturing toward his study. Once there, Vivian wasted no time. "Mr. Prescott, I understand. You've recently taken in a single mother and her child. As a social worker, I need to ensure this arrangement is appropriate." Jackson kept his expression neutral. "Their apartment building experienced plumbing issues. They're temporary guests. Ms. Bennett is a nurse recovering from pneumonia." Vivian made notes. "And your relationship with Ms. Bennett is—" "Friendship," Jackson replied firmly. "Quite a generous friend to offer accommodations in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods." Her tone remained professional, but her implication was clear. Jackson felt a flash of anger. "Is there something specific you're concerned about, Ms. Reeves?" "My concern is for the child," she replied. "When someone of your position suddenly develops an interest in a struggling family, questions naturally arise." The insinuation hung in the air between them. "I met Lily when she came to Bellevue Restaurant to trade her toy for food," Jackson stated coldly. "Her courage reminded me of my own childhood poverty. I'm helping because I can and because it's right. Nothing more." Vivian studied him. "Your background shows no previous interest in charitable causes involving children. This represents quite a change." "Perhaps I needed to meet Lily to understand what matters," Jackson replied. After several more probing questions, Vivian requested to speak with Charlotte and Lily separately. Jackson waited in his study, unaccustomed to the feeling of being judged and found potentially wanting. 30 minutes later, Vivian returned. "Ms. Bennett speaks highly of you," she acknowledged, "and Lily seems comfortable here. For now, I have no immediate concerns." "For now?" Jackson repeated. "I'll be filing a report and conducting a follow-up visit in 2 weeks. Unusual living arrangements between unrelated adults and children are something we monitor closely." After she left, Jackson found Charlotte in the guest house, her expression troubled. "I'm so sorry," she began. "Someone at the hospital must have reported seeing us with you. I never intended—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Jackson interrupted. "This is my fault. I didn't consider how our arrangement might appear to others." "She asked if there was a romantic relationship between us," Charlotte said, unable to hide her embarrassment. Jackson hadn't considered how his actions might compromise Charlotte's reputation. He'd been focused on practical solutions, not appearances. "I should start looking for a new apartment," Charlotte said quietly. "Your generosity has been incredible, but I can't allow this to complicate your life further." "No," Jackson said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "This is temporary, and your recovery is the priority. Let's not make decisions based on others' misperceptions." Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but only until I find something suitable." As Jackson walked back to the main house, his phone buzzed with a text from his CFO. "Board members asking questions about your repeated absences. Seth J. reporter called about rumors you're experiencing personal issues. Need to discuss damage control." Jackson pocketed the phone without responding. For the first time in his career, the opinions of the board and the press seemed remarkably unimportant. "Mr. Prescott, the board is waiting," his assistant reminded him, gesturing toward the conference room where 12 people sat around a gleaming table. Jackson checked his watch. 2:15 p.m. Lily's science presentation started at 2:30, and he had promised to attend. He had exactly 45 minutes to convince the board to delay the Westridge Pharmaceuticals acquisition. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, entering the room with practiced authority. "I've reviewed the Westridge proposal thoroughly, and I have concerns." For the next 30 minutes, Jackson presented a masterclass in business strategy, outlining potential regulatory issues and suggesting a 3-month delay to resolve them. The board members, accustomed to his meticulous analysis, raised few objections. "So we're agreed," Jackson concluded, glancing again at his watch. "We'll revisit Westridge next quarter." Richard Harmon, his longest-serving board member, raised an eyebrow. "You seem in a hurry, Jackson. Another appointment?" "Yes," Jackson replied simply, gathering his documents. "Anything the board should know about?" Richard pressed. Jackson paused. A month ago, he would have canceled any personal commitment for a meeting of this magnitude. A month ago, the idea of attending a second-grade science presentation wouldn't have crossed his mind. I promised a young friend I'd attend her school presentation, he said, surprising himself with his transparency. She's presenting on the respiratory system, something her mother, a nurse, helped her understand. The silence that followed was thick with confusion. Jackson Prescott, discussing a child's school event as a legitimate reason to end a board meeting early? Well, Richard finally said, give her our congratulations. Jackson nodded and left, feeling strangely liberated. 20 minutes later, he slipped into the back of the elementary school auditorium, just as Lily's class took the stage. When she spotted him, her face lit up with such pure joy that Jackson felt something shift inside him, as if pieces of his life were rearranging themselves into a new configuration. After the presentation, Lily ran to him, her handmade poster of the human lungs clutched proudly in her hands. You came. Mom said you might be too busy. I wouldn't have missed it, Jackson told her, realizing he meant it completely. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Charlotte joined Jackson on the terrace where he was answering emails. You made her day, she said, settling into a nearby chair. She talked about you being there all through dinner. Jackson set down his tablet. Her presentation was impressive. She has a real aptitude for science. Like her father, Charlotte said softly. He was a paramedic. Science was his passion too. It was the first time she'd volunteered information about her late husband. How did you meet? Jackson asked. Charlotte smiled at the memory. Car accident, actually. Nothing serious, but enough to need medical attention. He was the paramedic who responded. He kept checking on me after, bringing me medical journals he thought I'd find interesting since I was in nursing school. He sounds like a good man. The best, Charlotte agreed. After he died in that multiple car pileup, I wasn't sure we'd survive, not financially or emotionally. But Lily. She shook her head in wonder. She became so strong, so determined to make him proud. Jackson thought of the little girl offering her cherished toy for her mother's well-being. She's remarkable. Yes, Charlotte nodded. And she's becoming attached to you, Jackson. When you didn't answer her call yesterday, she was worried you'd stopped caring about us. The gentle warning was clear. Be careful with my daughter's heart. Had to silence my phone during negotiations, he explained. It won't happen again. Charlotte studied him. You rearranged your day for a second-grade presentation. That's not something I expected from Jackson Prescott, CEO. Neither did I, he admitted. But I'm finding that some commitments matter more than business. Even board meetings? She asked, clearly having heard about his hasty departure. Even those, he confirmed. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, then said, just be sure, Jackson. Because if you start something you can't finish, with Lily, with these gestures, it would be worse than never starting at all. Her words carried the weight of a woman who had already lost once, who couldn't bear to see her daughter lose again. I understand, Jackson said, and for the first time in years he was making decisions with his heart as much as his head. Higher, Jackson, higher! Lily squealed as she soared on the park swing, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. Jackson obliged, pushing gently but firmly, still unused to the delicate balance required, enough force to create excitement, but not enough to frighten. From a nearby bench, Charlotte watched them, a smile playing on her lips. 6 weeks had passed since they'd moved into Jackson's guest house, and the transformation in all of them was unmistakable. Charlotte herself had regained her strength, returning to part-time shifts at the hospital. Jackson had convinced her to accept a temporary position with his foundation's healthcare initiative, work she could do remotely while continuing her recovery. But the most profound changes were in Jackson himself. Did you see how high I went? Lily asked breathlessly as she finally hopped off the swing. I believe you almost reached the clouds, Jackson confirmed solemnly, earning a giggle. Can we get ice cream before the movie, please? Jackson glanced at Charlotte, who nodded her permission. These Sunday excursions had become their ritual, an activity followed by dinner and a movie back at the house. Last week had been the Natural History Museum, the week before a trip to the Botanical Gardens, places Jackson hadn't visited in years, if ever, now seen through the fresh perspective of a 7-year-old's enthusiasm. At the ice cream shop, Jackson watched as Lily deliberated between flavors with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Charlotte selected vanilla with hot fudge, while Jackson, still discovering his own preferences beyond business lunches, chose butter pecan after Lily's earnest recommendation. "You've got some." Charlotte gestured to the corner of his mouth, where a drop of ice cream lingered. Without thinking, Jackson used his monogrammed handkerchief to wipe it away, then froze mid-motion, suddenly self-conscious. "I don't think I've had ice cream in a cone since I was 12, he admitted. "That's just sad," Lily declared, her own chocolate-smeared face evidence of proper ice cream enjoyment. Charlotte laughed, a sound Jackson had grown to appreciate more than any corporate victory. "Some things we need to relearn," she said, her eyes meeting his with unexpected warmth. Back at the estate, Eleanor had prepared dinner, which they ate at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. Jackson had suggested the smaller, more intimate setting after noticing how uncomfortable Charlotte and Lily seemed in the cavernous main dining area. "Eleanor," Jackson said as she served the salad, "these Sunday dinners have become the highlight of my week. Thank you for accommodating our changing schedule." The housekeeper, who had worked for Jackson for 15 years, gave him a look of pleased surprise. "It's my pleasure, sir. The house feels more alive these days." After dinner came movie time, with Lily selecting an animated feature about a brave young princess. They settled in Jackson's rarely used media room, Lily nestled between the adults on the oversized sofa. Halfway through the film, Charlotte whispered, "Look," nodding toward Lily, who had fallen asleep against Jackson's arm. "Should I move her?" he whispered back. "She's fine," Charlotte assured him. "She trusts you." 3 simple words that somehow meant more than any business accolade he'd ever received. Later, after carrying Lily to her bed in the guest house and saying goodnight to Charlotte, Jackson returned to his study. His CFO had sent urgent emails about a competitor's unexpected acquisition, but for once Jackson didn't immediately reach for his laptop. Instead, he poured himself a scotch and stood by the window, looking out at the guest house where warm light still glowed from Charlotte's room. 6 weeks ago, he would have worked until midnight crafting a counterattack strategy. Tonight, he found himself replaying Lily's laughter on the swing, the way Charlotte's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the unfamiliar but welcome weight of a sleeping child against his shoulder. His phone rang. Richard Harmon from the board, the CEO. "Meridian deal is falling apart," Richard said without preamble. "We need to meet first thing tomorrow." "I'll be there," Jackson replied, then added, "but only until noon. I promised Lily I'd help with her science fair project tomorrow afternoon." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Jackson," Richard finally said, "the board is concerned about your distractions lately." "They're not distractions, Richard, they're priorities." After hanging up, Jackson turned off his phone, another unprecedented action, and decided some emails could wait until morning. Some traditions, he was learning, were worth creating. The storm arrived without warning, violent and sudden. Lightning split the sky as thunder rattled the windows of Jackson's estate. Rain pounded against the roof in angry torrents. Jackson was reviewing contracts in his study when the security system beeped, indicating that the door connecting the main house to the guest house had been opened. Moments later, Eleanor appeared at his doorway, her normally composed expression concerned. "It's Lily, sir. She's quite upset about the storm." Jackson followed Eleanor to find Lily in the kitchen, trembling in her unicorn pajamas, tears streaking her face. "Lily? What's wrong? Where's your mother?" "Mom got called to the hospital for an emergency." Her voice quivered. "Eleanor was staying with me, but then the thunder came and—" Her words were cut off by another thunderclap that made her jump. Jackson knelt before her. "You're afraid of storms?" She nodded miserably. "Dad used to sit with me during storms. He said the angels were just bowling in heaven." Fresh tears spilled. "But now he's gone, and Mom had to go, and I tried to be brave. But another thunderous boom sent her launching into Jackson's arms. He caught her automatically, her small body trembling against his chest. "It's all right," he said softly, awkwardly patting her back. Comforting a frightened child wasn't in his considerable skill set. "You're safe here." Eleanor quietly stepped away, leaving them alone. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" Jackson offered, remembering his own mother's remedy for frightening nights. Lily nodded against his shoulder. He carried her to a stool at the kitchen island, then set about heating milk. His movements were uncertain. He'd never made hot chocolate before. But Lily watched him with such trust that he was determined not to disappoint. "My father wasn't around when I was young," Jackson found himself saying as he stirred the warming milk. "And when my mother died, I went to foster homes. Some were nice, some weren't." Lily's eyes widened. "You didn't have a mom or dad?" "Not after I was 8. He added cocoa powder, remembering how his mother had done it. "I was scared of many things then." "You were? But you're not scared of anything now." Jackson smiled sadly. "Everyone is afraid of something, Lily." "What are you afraid of?" she asked, wiping away the last of her tears. Jackson considered deflecting, but those earnest blue eyes demanded honesty. "Failure," he said finally. "Being alone, not mattering to anyone." He poured the hot chocolate into mugs, adding a marshmallow to Lily's. "But you matter to lots of people," Lily said, accepting her mug. "You matter to me and Mom and Eleanor and all those people who work for you." "That's different," Jackson explained, sitting beside her. "Working for someone isn't the same as caring about them." Thunder crashed again, but Lily seemed less frightened now, focused on their conversation. "Mom says people show they care in different ways," she said, chocolate mustache forming above her lip. "Like when you came to my science presentation even though you had important meetings." Her simple observation struck him deeply. Yes, he had chosen her presentation over a critical meeting. Not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared. "Your mother is very wise," Jackson said softly. They sat together through the storm, Lily eventually curling against his side on the sofa as he read from a book they found in the library. By the time Charlotte returned, the storm had passed and Lily was asleep with her head on Jackson's lap. Charlotte stood in the doorway, still in her nurse's scrubs, taking in the scene with surprise. "She was frightened by the storm," Jackson explained quietly. "We had hot chocolate and stories." Charlotte's expression softened as she approached. "She usually hides under her bed during storms." She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You must have magic powers." "No magic," Jackson replied. "Just understanding what it's like to be scared and alone." Charlotte studied him, her gaze gentle but penetrating. "Sometimes I forget that beneath the billionaire businessman is someone who once was a little boy who lost everything." Her words, so simply stated yet profoundly accurate, left Jackson momentarily speechless. "Thank you for being there for her," Charlotte said, carefully lifting her sleeping daughter. "It means more than you know." As they left, Jackson remained on the sofa, realizing that for the first time in decades, someone saw him not just as Jackson Prescott, CEO, but as simply Jackson, a man with fears and a past capable of both vulnerability and comfort. It was terrifying and strangely freeing. "I circled the parts I don't understand," Lily said, sliding her math homework across the kitchen table to Jackson. It was a Tuesday evening and the scene had become remarkably ordinary. Lily at homework, Charlotte preparing dinner, Jackson arriving home early enough to join them rather than working late at the office. "Fractions again, huh?" Jackson studied the worksheet. "Let's tackle these together." 2 months had passed since the Bennetts had moved into his guest house. The plumbing in their apartment building had long been fixed, but neither Charlotte nor Jackson had mentioned them moving out. The arrangement had shifted from temporary solution to comfortable routine. Charlotte, now fully recovered, had taken a part-time position at the hospital while continuing to consult for Jackson's healthcare foundation. The flexible schedule allowed her to be home when Lily returned from school. "Math makes my brain hurt," Lily complained, though she leaned in attentively as Jackson explained the concept using apple slices as visual aids. "You're good at this," Charlotte observed, stirring something that filled the kitchen with a delicious Aroma. I think she understands fractions better from you than from her teacher. Jackson felt an unexpected glow of pride. His skills with financial models and market predictions were well documented, but teaching a 7-year-old math felt like a more significant accomplishment. Mr. Wilson gave me an A on my science project, Lily announced. He said my respiratory system model was exemplary. That means really good. I know what exemplary means, Jackson replied, feigning offense. Lily giggled, a sound that had become one of his favorites. I told him you helped me with the design, but I did the coloring all by myself. Teamwork at its finest, Charlotte said, setting plates on the table. Dinner was simple but delicious. Charlotte had discovered a talent for cooking during her recovery. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Lily's school stories and occasional discussions about Charlotte's patients. How was your meeting with the board? Charlotte asked as they cleared the dishes. Jackson hesitated. The meeting had been challenging, several. Board members had expressed concern about his changing priorities and lack of killer instinct in recent acquisitions. It was instructive, he finally said. Richard Harmon suggested I might be losing my edge. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. And are you? I'm not sure edge is what matters anymore, Jackson admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. The corporate world measures success in numbers, not moments. Charlotte considered him thoughtfully as she loaded the dishwasher. And which matters more to you now? Before Jackson could answer, Lily called from the living room where she'd gone to fetch a book. Mom, Jackson, come quick, I'm on TV. They hurried in to find a local news report about Lily's school science fair. The camera panned briefly to Lily explaining her project to a judge, with Jackson visible in the background, looking proudly attentive in a way no business achievement had ever inspired. You're famous now, Jackson teased as the segment ended. Lily beamed. The news lady interviewed me about my project. She asked who helped me, and I said you did, and she looked really surprised. Why surprised? Charlotte asked. She said, Jackson Prescott helped with your science project. And I said yes. He's really smart about lungs because his mom died from not being able to breathe right. Was that okay to say? She looked suddenly uncertain. Jackson felt a momentary tightness in his chest at hearing his personal history so innocently repeated. It's fine, Lily. It's true. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, Jackson's phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. Fox Business wants to interview you about your mentorship of underprivileged children. Apparently you were spotted at an elementary school science fair. He set the phone down without responding. The corporate world was finally noticing his absence, interpreting his personal choices through their own lens, calculating what advantage he must be seeking, what strategy he was employing by spending time with a child and her mother. They couldn't understand that for the first time in decades, Jackson Prescott wasn't following a strategy at all. He was simply living. Everything okay? Charlotte asked, noticing his expression as she entered with 2 cups of tea. Perfect, he replied, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Jackson stared at the email on his tablet, reading it a 3rd time, though the words remained unchanged. Charlotte had received a job offer from Boston Children's Hospital, a prestigious position in their neonatal intensive care unit. The opportunity was exceptional, one that would advance her career significantly, and it was over 200 miles away. He set the tablet down just as Charlotte entered his study, her expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. You saw the offer, she said, noticing the email on his screen. I did. Congratulations. It's an incredible opportunity. I haven't accepted yet, she replied, sitting across from him. I wanted to discuss it with you first. 3 months had passed since the Bennetts had moved into his guest house. 3 months of dinners together, weekend outings, homework help, and movie nights. 3 months during which Jackson's carefully structured life had transformed into something warmer, more meaningful, and infinitely more complicated. It's perfect for you, Jackson said, maintaining his composure despite the hollow feeling spreading in his chest. Your specialty? Excellent compensation, a world-class institution. Charlotte nodded slowly. Yes, all those things are true, but Lily has settled in at school here, made friends, and there's... She paused, meeting his eyes directly. There's what's developed between all of us. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. What exactly had developed? They hadn't put a name to it. This arrangement, this quasi-family they'd become. Jackson attended Lily's school events. Charlotte helped reorganize his charitable foundation. They shared meals and conversations and quiet evenings, but they'd never defined what it meant. You can't turn down an opportunity like this, Jackson said finally. Not for a temporary living arrangement. Something flickered in Charlotte's eyes. Disappointment? Relief? He couldn't tell. You're right, she agreed softly. It was always going to be temporary, wasn't it? That evening, dinner was unusually quiet. Lily, perceptive as always, glanced between the adults with growing concern. Is something wrong? She finally asked. Did I do something bad? No, sweetheart, Charlotte assured her. But we do need to talk about something important. As Charlotte gently explained about the Boston offer, Jackson watched Lily's expression change from confusion to disbelief to the beginning of tears. But we can't leave, she protested. What about school? What about my friends? What about... She turned to Jackson, her blue eyes swimming. What about you? I'll still be here, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. And you can visit. Boston isn't that far. It's not the same, Lily said, tears now flowing freely. We're supposed to stay together. We're like a family now. The word family hit Jackson with unexpected force. Was that what they had become? Had he, without realizing it, begun to think of them that way too? Lily, Charlotte said gently but firmly, sometimes opportunities come that we need to take, even when they're difficult. This job is important for our future. But we're happy here, Lily insisted. Aren't we? Charlotte looked at Jackson, who found himself momentarily unable to speak. Later, after Lily had gone to bed still upset, Charlotte found Jackson on the terrace, staring at the night sky. I've accepted the position, she said quietly. We'll leave in 2 weeks. Jackson nodded, still looking at the stars. I'll help with the arrangements, finding an apartment, moving expenses, anything you need. That's very generous, Charlotte replied. But it isn't necessary. The hospital offers relocation assistance. The formality in her voice felt wrong after months of growing closeness. Charlotte, he began, finally turning to face her. Are you sure this is what you want? She studied him, her expression unreadable, in the dim light. What I want. She shook her head slightly. Jackson, we've been living in a beautiful bubble here. You've been incredibly kind, but this isn't real life. At some point, we need to return to reality. And reality is that you and Lily don't belong here, with me? The vulnerability in his question surprised them both. I don't know what we are to each other, Charlotte said softly. And until that's clear, moving forward seems safer than risking. Disappointment, especially for Lily. She was right, of course. He'd opened his home but kept parts of himself carefully guarded. They'd created this in-between existence, neither fully separate nor fully committed. I understand, he said finally. But as Charlotte returned to the guest house, leaving him alone, under the vast night sky, Jackson realized that understanding and accepting were entirely different things. Jackson paced the length of his office, phone pressed to his ear. Whatever the cost, I want the foundation headquarters moved to Boston. Yes, immediately. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching with a mixture of concern and understanding. She'd never seen her employer like this, agitated, uncertain, making major business decisions based on personal considerations. Sir, she said when he ended the call, perhaps you should consider a more direct approach. Jackson looked up, suddenly aware of her presence. What do you mean? May I speak frankly? When he nodded, she continued. In 15 years, I've watched you solve complex business problems with remarkable clarity. You identify what you want and pursue it directly. Yet with Ms. Bennett and Lily, you're creating elaborate workarounds rather than simply telling them how you feel. Her words struck with uncomfortable precision. It's not that simple, Eleanor. Isn't it? She challenged gently. They're leaving in 10 days. What exactly are you risking by being honest? Everything, he thought. Rejection, disappointment, the realization that what had felt meaningful to him was simply gratitude or convenience to them. Yet as he stared out the window at the guest house where Charlotte was packing their belongings, Jackson knew Eleanor was right. He was strategizing like a businessman, when what was needed was the courage to be simply a man, one who had discovered quite unexpectedly that his carefully constructed life felt empty without a nurse and her daughter in it. That evening, Jackson invited Charlotte to dinner, just the two of them at the restaurant where an unexpected meeting with Lily had changed everything. Bellevue, Charlotte noted as they were seated at Jackson's regular table. This feels like coming full circle. In a way it is, he agreed, his usual confidence wavering slightly. This is where everything began. After they ordered, Charlotte folded her hands on the table. Jackson, why are we here? If this is a goodbye dinner, it's very thoughtful, but... It's not goodbye, he interrupted. At least I hope it isn't. Charlotte's expression grew cautious. What do you mean? Jackson took a breath. I've been thinking about solutions. My foundation is opening a Boston office. I could spend significant time there. Or you could work remotely some days. We could find a balance that allows you this opportunity without ending what we've started. And what exactly have we started, Jackson? Charlotte asked quietly. It was the question he'd been avoiding for months, the one that required him to examine, feelings he'd kept carefully controlled. Something I never expected, he admitted. Something I wasn't looking for but now can't imagine living without. Charlotte's eyes softened. Jackson, I care about you, Charlotte. Both of you. More than I thought possible. The words felt foreign on his tongue, unpracticed but necessary. The thought of you leaving. It's made me realize how empty my life was before you arrived, and how empty it will be again if you go. Our lives are very different, she said gently. You built an empire. I take care of sick babies. How would that work long term? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. Charlotte studied him, her expression thoughtful. When Mark, Lily's father, died, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else close enough to hurt us if we lost them. It felt safer that way. And now? Now I'm not sure safety is worth what we'd be giving up. She reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his. But Jackson, we can't build a relationship on convenience or obligation. If we try this, whatever this is, it has to be real. For all our sakes, but especially Lily's. It is real, he assured her. More real than anything in my life has been for a very long time. As they talked through dinner, possibilities emerged from what had seemed an inevitable ending. Charlotte would accept the Boston position, but they would find a way to bridge the distance. Jackson would restructure his schedule to allow for regular travel. They would take things slowly, thoughtfully, with Lily's well-being guiding their decisions. Later, walking together under the stars, Charlotte asked the question that had lingered unspoken. Why haven't you built a family of your own, Jackson? You're successful, intelligent, capable of such kindness when you allow yourself to be. The honesty of the night made evasion impossible. After my mother died, I learned that attachment means vulnerability, he said quietly. I decided success was safer than connection. Until a little girl walked into a restaurant with an easy-bake oven and reminded me what courage really looks like. Charlotte's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. Neither knew exactly what the future held, but for the first time, they were willing to face it together. Jackson examined the documents one final time before signing. The purchase of a townhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood, elegant, historic, and conveniently located near Boston Children's Hospital. A surprise for Charlotte and Lily, who had been struggling to find suitable housing with Boston's competitive rental market. The paperwork is in order, Mr. Prescott, his real estate attorney confirmed. The property is yours. Would you like to see it first, or shall we arrange for the keys to be delivered to Ms. Bennett directly? I'll present them myself, Jackson replied. I'm flying to Boston tomorrow. 5 days had passed since their dinner at Bellevue. 5 days of careful planning, of rearranging his schedule to accommodate regular trips to Boston, of imagining a future divided between two cities but united by something stronger than geography. The next morning, Jackson arrived at Charlotte's new workplace with a bouquet of lilies and a small gift box containing the house keys. He waited patiently as the receptionist announced him, taking in the bright modern facility where Charlotte would be helping save vulnerable newborns. Jackson? Charlotte appeared, looking professional and confident in her new hospital ID badge. This is a surprise. I thought you were coming tomorrow. I wanted to see your first day, he explained, presenting the flowers. And I have something for you. Charlotte smiled, but there was a slight wariness in her expression. That's very thoughtful. I have a break in 10 minutes. We could talk in the cafeteria? The cafeteria was crowded with staff in various colored scrubs. They found a small table in the corner where Jackson handed her the elegant blue box. What's this? She asked. A solution to your housing problem, he replied. Open it. Charlotte lifted the lid, confusion crossing her face at the sight of the keys. I don't understand. A townhouse on Beacon Hill, Jackson explained. 4 bedrooms, a small garden, walking distance to the hospital, and an excellent school for Lily. It's yours. Well, not legally yours yet, but we can discuss those details later. For now, consider it a lease with very favorable terms. He had expected delight, relief, perhaps even happy tears. Instead, Charlotte's expression closed like a door shutting. You bought a house? Without telling me? It's an investment property, Jackson explained, sensing her unease. It makes financial sense, and it solves your immediate need. My immediate need, Charlotte repeated, her voice cooling. Jackson, we discussed trying to build something real between us, something equal, and your solution is to… What? Make me your charity case, your kept woman? That's not… Jackson began, but Charlotte cut him off. I know you meant well, she said, lowering her voice as a nearby table glanced their way. But this is exactly what I was afraid of. You see a problem, you throw money at it. That might work in business, but relationships don't work that way. Jackson felt his own frustration rising. This isn't about money. It's about creating stability. For you and Lily. Stability I didn't ask for and can't reciprocate, Charlotte replied. How am I supposed to feel living in a house I could never afford on my own? What message does that send to Lily about independence, about earning your way? I thought you'd be happy, Jackson said, genuinely bewildered by her reaction. Charlotte sighed, her anger giving way to resignation. That's the problem, Jackson. You didn't really think about how I'd feel at all. You thought about the problem, housing, and implemented a solution that made sense to you. A nurse approached their table. Dr. Kelly needs you in the NICU, Charlotte. Charlotte nodded, then turned back to Jackson. I need to go. And I think we need some time to reconsider whether this can work. We come from different worlds, Jackson. Maybe we should accept that. She slid the box back across the table, stood, and walked away without looking back. 2 days later, Eleanor found Jackson in his study, staring at the Boston property contract. Ms. Bennett called, she said carefully. She asked that you not contact her for a while. She says Lily has been enrolled in a new school and they're staying temporarily with a colleague until they find suitable housing. Jackson nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Sir? Eleanor ventured. Perhaps in time. That will be all, Eleanor. Jackson interrupted. When she left, he reached for the phone, nearly calling Charlotte before remembering her request. Instead, he called his office. Push all meetings to next week, he instructed his assistant. And tell the board I'll be unavailable for the quarterly review. For the first time in his career, Jackson Prescott was shirking his professional responsibilities and finding he didn't care. The empire he'd built, the success he'd pursued with single-minded determination, suddenly felt meaningless compared to what he'd lost, or rather, what he'd never truly had to begin with. Sir, there's an envelope addressed to you. Personal, not business. Jackson looked up from his desk where quarterly reports lay neglected. 3 weeks had passed since the Boston disaster. 3 weeks of silence from Charlotte and Lily. The envelope contained a child's drawing and a printed flyer. Boston Academy Spring Program. Famous scientists through history. A star was drawn beside Lily Bennett, Marie Curie, with a performance, time circled in purple crayon. No note. No explanation. Just an invitation that could only have come from Lily herself. Jackson stared at it, hope and uncertainty battling within him. That Friday found him sitting in the back row of the school auditorium, watching as nervous children took the stage. When Lily appeared in a lab coat with her hair powdered gray, the sound system suddenly squealed with feedback. She froze, her prepared speech forgotten as panic crossed her face. Her eyes searched the audience desperately until they found Jackson. Their gazes locked and her small shoulders straightened. Marie Curie once said, she began with renewed confidence, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood." After the performance, Charlotte stood waiting in the lobby, her expression a complex mixture of surprise and resignation. "She sent the invitation, didn't she?" Charlotte asked. "Yes," Jackson answered. "I wouldn't have come otherwise." "I know." Her voice softened. "She misses you. We both do." They sat in a small cafe near the school, an untouched plate of cookies between them. Lily had been thrilled to see Jackson, hugging him fiercely before Charlotte gently explained they needed to talk privately. "I shouldn't have reacted that way," Charlotte admitted. "The house was generous, but—" "No," Jackson interrupted. "You were right. I was solving a problem, not building a relationship. I'm used to fixing things with money." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Mom?" Lily appeared beside their table, having escaped the teacher tasked with watching the children after the performance. "Lily, I told you to wait." "But it's important," Lily insisted, her Marie Curie wig slightly askew. She looked between them, blue eyes determined. "Are you two fighting because of me?" "No, sweetheart," Charlotte assured her. "Adult relationships are complicated." "They don't have to be," Lily said with a child's certainty. "Mom smiles more when you're around, Jackson. And you laugh when you're with us. You didn't laugh before, did you?" Jackson shook his head, speechless at her perception. "Dad would want us to be happy," Lily continued. "And we were happy together. Can't we just be a family again?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Jackson, who found himself equally moved by the simple wisdom of a 7-year-old who saw what they'd been too afraid to acknowledge. "Sometimes," Jackson said softly, "it takes the bravest person in the room to speak the truth." 6 months later, Jackson's estate had transformed. The formal living room now housed a piano where Lily practiced diligently each afternoon. The once pristine kitchen regularly bore evidence of baking experiments, some more successful than others. Bookshelves that had displayed leather-bound classics now shared space with children's literature and medical journals. Most notably, the guest house stood empty. Its former occupants had moved into the main house, bringing warmth and life to spaces that had previously known only echoing silence. "Checkmate," Lily announced triumphantly, moving her queen into position on the chessboard between them. Jackson studied the board with exaggerated dismay. "How did I miss that?" "Because you were letting me win," Lily replied, giving him a knowing look that reminded him so much of Charlotte. "You shouldn't do that. How will I get better if you don't? Play your best." "You're absolutely right," Jackson acknowledged, resetting the pieces. No more holding back. From the kitchen came the sounds of Charlotte preparing dinner, humming softly as she worked. The delicious aroma of her signature lasagna filled the air, a comforting reminder of the new rhythms their lives had established. Eleanor entered the room, her once formal demeanor now considerably warmed. "Phone call for you, sir. Mr. Harmon says it's urgent." "Tell him I'll call back tomorrow," Jackson replied without hesitation. "Family time is non-negotiable." Eleanor smiled, no longer surprised by such responses. "Very good, sir." After Lily had decisively won a second game, legitimately this time, she ran to fetch something from her room. Charlotte joined Jackson on the sofa, curling naturally against him. "The hospital called," she said. They're offering me the department director position. That's incredible, Jackson said, genuinely proud. You've accomplished so much in just 6 months. It means more responsibility, longer hours sometimes, she cautioned. We'll make it work, he assured her. That's what families do. The word family no longer felt foreign on his tongue. What had begun as an unexpected encounter at a restaurant had evolved into something Jackson had never thought possible for himself. A genuine connection that transcended his world of acquisitions and assets. Lily returned, carefully carrying her easy bake oven, the same worn yellow toy she'd once offered to trade for food. Can we make dessert? She asked. I found a new recipe. Of course, Jackson replied. The sight of the toy oven still triggered a rush of emotion, the memory of a small, brave girl willing to sacrifice something she loved for someone she loved more. As they gathered around the kitchen island, the three of them working together to create tiny, imperfect cakes, Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The path had not been straight or simple. There had been misunderstandings, adjustments, and necessary compromises on all sides. Charlotte had accepted the Boston position, but negotiated a schedule that allowed them to split time between both cities. Jackson had restructured his company to permit remote work and delegated responsibilities he'd once jealously guarded. They'd found a rhythm that honored both their careers while prioritizing their relationship and Lily's stability. They're ready, Lily announced as the timer dinged. She carefully removed 3 small cakes from the toy oven, presenting them proudly. They looked delicious, Charlotte praised, accepting hers. Jackson took his with appropriate solemnity. A masterpiece. As they enjoyed Lily's creation, making appreciative noises despite the slightly overdone edges, Jackson felt a profound contentment that no business success had ever provided. His empire of steel and glass stocks and assets would always be part of him, but it was no longer what defined him. I have news too, he said when they'd finished the last crumbs. The Foundation's pediatric healthcare initiative secured funding for 10 new clinics nationwide. That's wonderful, Charlotte said, squeezing his hand. You're changing lives. Just as you changed mine, he replied softly. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jackson and Charlotte stood on the terrace beneath a canopy of stars. The same stars that had witnessed their first honest conversation months ago now shone down on 2 people who had found their way back to each other, stronger for having navigated the journey. Are you happy? Charlotte asked, her head resting against his shoulder. Jackson thought of his life before, the cold precision, the relentless pursuit of more, the emptiness he'd refused to acknowledge. And he thought of now, messy, unpredictable, occasionally chaotic, and infinitely more meaningful. Happier than I ever imagined possible, he answered truthfully. In the quiet night, with the woman he loved beside him and a sleeping child who had taught him more about courage than any business negotiation ever could, Jackson Prescott, once defined solely by his billions, had finally discovered what true wealth meant.